بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا Muhammad. So we were talking about shafa'a, intercession, and shafa'a is not restricted to the afterlife. There is a type of shafa'a, intercession, even recognized by Islamic law, which we would probably equate with like a guarantor of something. Like if you apply for a loan and you don't have good enough credit, you need someone to co-sign. That's a type of shafa'a. So it's the good reputation or good reputation of someone else kind of helps you to achieve something. And usually it would, in Islamic history, it's often happened time where there'd be a shafa'a towards, and I think we still do today, like if in a court case, at sentencing, people are allowed to speak, right? Whether they're for the person who's going to be sentenced or for the victim. The people who are representing the person to be sentenced, they're a type of shafa'a, interceding to say, you know what, he's really a good guy, he slipped up, he didn't really mean to throw her off the bridge, it just happened and shouldn't, all that. And then the family of the victim will say their piece, which will be like a shafa'a for the judge to actually impose a tougher sentence. So that is, in society, that's accepted, that there will be someone who will, that someone, on the basis of someone's reputation. When you include references at the bottom of your CV or resume, or they ask for letters of recommendation, what's that? Shafa'a. Right, it's someone who's respected or well known or is reputable, and they're saying, this is a good guy, she's a good person, hire them, so forth. Or even in terms of marriage, someone who intercedes on behalf of the other if it's not well known. These are all types of shafa'a. Yes. Yeah, why not? You can. When you ask someone, say, make dua for me, what is that? Why are you asking that person to remember you and their dua to Allah? You can ask Allah directly, but this does not negate the idea that this person, because of perhaps they're the type of person that Allah yastajib ad-da'wah, that they're mujab ad-da'wah, they're someone whose da'wah is answered by Allah. Maybe he has a better sila, connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than you do. And so when you have this type of suspicion about someone, you say, oh, please, make dua for me. Or when people go to Hajj or Umrah, why do we say make dua for me? Because we believe that those are sacred places, and someone making dua in those places has a good or better opportunity for their dua to be answered. No, like Uwais al-Qarni and Umar. Uwais al-Qarni is not like Umar, but nevertheless Umar asked him, who was a tabi'i who lived later on, that the Prophet ﷺ prophesied there will be this person that people will not pay much attention to, but nevertheless he will be from amongst awliya and so forth. So they asked him to make dua on their behalf, Sayyidina Umar. So these are all types of shafa'at. They're all type of intercession. And in fact, during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ, people would come to him for this. Even before his nubuwwah, even before he was a prophet, they would seek him out to intercede on behalf of others. And you can think of reconciliation between two disputing parties as a type of intercession as well. Do you have a question?
Going back to the intercession when I was it was more, but even a mother would not be willing to help her son because everyone would lose himself that day because they see right in front of them the punishment. So how likely is it that
That's a good question, and it actually brings me into the next point I want to talk about. What you're describing there is in mahshar, which is when after people are resurrected, right? So you're in your grave, your bones, Allah brings you back, flesh comes back, lungs, heart, everything. You become a body once again. Even if you were fish food, still you'll be brought back together. When you are resurrected, then people will congregate in a particular place, somewhere on the earth. Or another opinion is that the earth will cease to be, and it will be a new created place where people will congregate. This is called Ard al-Mahshar, the place where people congregate. And there's many sort of reciprocal aspects of Hajj and Umrah, for example, that mimic, that give us some glimpse into what al-Mahshar will be like. So on that day, people will be resurrected, come out from their graves, naked nonetheless, and then they will congregate in al-Mahshar. Even Aisha said, to the Prophet ﷺ, we're naked in front of everybody. How is that going to be? She's like, Aisha, al-amru akbar min dhalik. The thing is much more intense than that. That you'll be concerned with, who's next to you and is not wearing any clothes. Much more intense, and it will be the most intense experience. One of the most intense experiences that will be of the events of the afterlife. So when people are in the Ard al-Mahshar, and in fact, it's not like an event like, we've been here a few hours, when do we get out of here? It could be years, and then a year in the next life is like 1,000 that we count in this life. So we're talking thousands, if not thousands of years, fil mahshar. Everyone standing in the burning, the sun, the heat. And the hadith describe how there will be people who are drenched in sweat, some of them up to their ankles, some of them up to their knees, some up to their chest, some up to their necks, some of them completely submerged in their sweat. And this is also an indication of, a foreshadowing of what will be next for them, where they will be in the afterlife. So as people are waiting, and waiting, and waiting, and waiting, and it's tormentous, this whole thing that's going on. Adullah minha, Allah save us from it, inshallah. But then people will be looking for an intercessor. Someone who will provide, and no one will care about the other person. This is when يوم الفر المرء من أخيه وأمه وأبيه وصاحبته وبنيه لكل شأن يغنيه. شأن يغنيه, they'll be busy something completely different. And mahshar, no one's thinking about anybody else. But then they will go to the various prophets. And the hadith sort of indicate maybe in order, but they'll go to the various prophets. So they'll go to Adam and they say, look at the condition we are in, intercede for us. He said, no, I ate from the tree and I'm not in a position, nafsi, nafsi. Even the prophets will say, nafsi, nafsi, myself. Then they'll go to some of the other prophets like Ibrahim, alayhi salam, and he will say, no, it wasn't really untruth, but I told them that the big idol, did it to the rest of them, and nafsi, nafsi. Then they go to Noah, and he'll say, well, I made dua against my people. How am I going to intercede for them now? Nafsi, nafsi. So they go through, and the same thing with Moses and Jesus and all of the prophets, till they reach whom? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And they say, you are Safatullah wa Khaliluhu wa Habibu. You are the purest from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Khalil and His befriended one and His Habib, His beloved. So when he's asked, he will say, Ana laha, I am for it. Ana laha. He didn't say nafsi, nafsi. He says, Ana laha, I am for it. And with that, and this is called the shafa'a al-udma, the general shafa'a, intercession, then people will be allowed to be taken into account and they'll be removed from Ard al-Mahshar. So it doesn't happen until the Prophet ﷺ actually does that. Intercedes on all of our humanity's behalf, collectively. All the billions or whatever, how many billions of people have ever lived. He will make that intercession. And this is called the greatest or the general shafa'ah. So that includes people who believed in him, people who didn't believe in him, people who didn't know him, people who know him, everyone. Hence, هو المبعوث رحمة للعالمين. He is the one who was sent as a mercy to all the worlds, the universe. Even those who opposed him, he is still a mercy to them, even though they might not realize it, at least on that day. So once that happens, then there'll be the taking into accounts, and people will walk across the sirat, that thin bridge over hellfire. And then the ones who are successful, some will pass like a bolt of lightning, some will pass like the fastest stallion, some will pass like a mule, some will pass as if they're walking, some will take years to pass, to go across, and some will slip and get hooked on the hooks of the sirat and be hooked there for centuries before they can pass. And some will completely fall. So that's the initial shafa'ah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Then there's other types of shafa'at in the next life. That's why Abu Hurairah asked who would be the most happy with your shafa'ah, who's in the best position. So he's asking about a very specific type of shafa'ah. So the other shafa'at will include those who were sinners and they implore and beseech the Prophet ﷺ to intercede on their behalf, and so they receive a type of shafa'ah. Even those who were kuffar and disbelieved in him, there will be a type of shafa'ah. Even the munafiqeen, the hypocrites, to lessen their punishment in hellfire, not to be removed, but to lessen. There will be those who were destined for hellfire from amongst the believers because of their deeds. Their bad deeds outweighed their good deeds. But based upon the shafa'ah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they will enter paradise without punishment. So these are all different types of shafa'at that the Prophet ﷺ does, as well as the other prophets, as we mentioned, generally for their own people. And then people amongst the ummah of Muhammad ﷺ will also be in a position of shafa'ah. Now the question may arise, I think, that you had, does that contradict with the idea that, we're going to be accountable for our deeds, and how can, this guy who was terrible and he got some intercession and he passes the test, and I didn't get the extra credit, and it doesn't work like all of that. On the one hand, the Quran says, "Udkhulul jannata bima kuntum ta'malun." Enter paradise by that which you have done. In other words, with the deeds that you have brought. And on the other hand, the hadith that's clear when the Prophet ﷺ recounts of a man who will be brought before the hisab, yani to happen, the accounting, and he will be asked, would you like to enter paradise with your deeds, or by the blessing of one of the blessings that you have? So this was a man from Bani Israel, and they had long lifespans. He said, no, I've been in constant prayer for 600 years. That should be, good enough. So he chose his deeds. So the angels took his deeds on one side of the scale, and the blessing of one blessing, even the blessing of vision, of sight, on the other, and it was weighed much heavier than all of his deeds put together. And so the angels started to drag him towards hellfire. And then he said, wait, let me enter by Allah's mercy. So he was entered into paradise. The Sahaba, the companions, were kind of dumbfounded, gobsmacked. They said, even you, Ya Rasulullah? Even you will not can enter that way, but by the mercy? He said, إِلَّا أَن يَتَغَمَّدِنَ اللَّهُ بِرَحْمَتِهِ. Except if Allah encompasses me in His encompassing mercy. I'm not entering by my deeds either. So the reconciliation between the two nusus, between this sacred text and this sacred text, is that by Allah's permission and by His mercy, truly that's how we enter paradise. But when it says udkhulul jannata bima kuntum ta'malun, enter paradise with your deeds, then that's an indication that a sign of Allah's mercy upon you is that He gave you good deeds to begin with. Right? Allahu khalaqakum wa ma ta'malun. Allah created you and that which you do. So what you've done really, it's not really about you. Even Allah giving you those good deeds to begin with, isn't that mercy? So truly you are only entering paradise by Allah's mercy, not literally by your good deeds. Right? And some people, they want to de-emphasize the aspect that the Prophet ﷺ or others amongst the Salihin, the Awliya, the Siddiqeen, the Shuhada have the ability to intercede. And they say, no, only intercede with your good deeds. As if it's a type of shirk to say that the intercession of human beings, people, is, sounds like shirk. Well, if you actually believe that your good deeds have any real power on their own to enter into paradise, that's also shirk. Right? Because now you're associating partners that this deed or deeds will affect Allah. Impossible. So we don't even believe that of these human beings, but the Sunnah has come very clearly and very strongly that based upon also Allah's mercy, Allah will allow these people that Allah has shown mercy upon, and the greatest one of them all is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he will intercede on the behalf of others. So whether we implore in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by virtue of our deeds, or by His names, or by the jah or the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, ultimately it's only Allah. He's not affected by those things, but this is more for our benefit, right? Because if we show reverence and aggrandize what is an indication of reverence to Allah, then the two are the same, they're akin. Without really believing that any of those things can actually have an effect on Allah. Allah is unaffectable. Our creed, Allah is unaffectable. لا يؤثر فيه شيء إنما هو يؤثر. Nothing affects Him that way. He is the effector, He is the one who affects everything. But as a manifestation of His mercy, He gave us this sort of tanawwa. He gave us all of these options in how to know Him, how to reach Him. And everybody is different. Allah has a standard baseline, fast 1 month of the year, pray 5 times a day, give zakat, certain percentage of your extraneous income, so forth. That's a baseline. But beyond that, Allah will open doors for people in different ways. Some people, their door will be fasting. Some people, their door will be praying. Some people, their door will be charity. Some people, their door will be knowledge. Some people, their door will be love. So why do we want to constrict that which is wide, which is vast, and say it only has to be this way? Not. If one is not comfortable invoking or imploring, the Prophet ﷺ, even in your dua, when you're making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then don't do it. It's not obligation. You don't have to do it. But if you think that by calling upon your deeds as a type of tawassul or intercessor on your behalf is completely different, it's not. The same concept is in effect. So he asked about this, and so there's all these different categories of shafa'ah. So he's asking about, here Abu Hurairah showing a little bit of his reputation, his personality, because he wants to know man as'ad al-nas bi shafa'atika. And he said as'ad al-nas. He didn't say as'ad al-mu'mineen. He said who is the happiest of people. Thereby he knows that shafa'ah is going to happen for people in general, not even just believers or just Muslims. Everyone will have some stake in that intercession. And then when the Prophet ﷺ addresses him back, he says, Ya Abu Hurairah. He calls him by his name or his nickname. Imagine you're talking to the Prophet ﷺ and he calls you by your name. Even that in of itself, it's a type of etiquette, adab the Prophet ﷺ had with his Sahaba. He would introduce happiness to them in this manner. And he would never, or very rarely, reproach someone directly. But when he was talking something that was a bishara, like a good sign, he would say and tell them to their face and mention them by name. But when he reproached someone, he didn't do that. What he would do, he would say, مَا بَالُ قَوْمٍ يَفْعَلُونَ كَذَا وَكَذَا. What about a people who do this and do that? And he has someone in mind, and the one that he has in mind can, see that, but he wouldn't say it directly. Or, for example, he would tell some of the Sahaba to kind of take care of it on his behalf. Once a man was wearing something that was dyed with saffron, which is disliked, or even, different opinions about it, but he had this, saffron item garment that he was wearing. And so he told the Sahaba, لو قلت صاحبكم يترك هذه الصفرة. If you tell him just to avoid wearing the yellow thing. He didn't say it to his face. And you might say, well, big deal, so what if he did? It's not a big deal. But imagine the Prophet ﷺ rebuking you or reproaching you, even a little thing. It would feel like a big deal. So he was aware of this and he didn't even do that with the Sahaba. And Anas ibn Malik remarked about him, كان لا يكاد يواجه أحدا بما يكره. He would never or rarely would he reproach someone with something they did not like. And another hadith, وكان لا يقول لا. He wouldn't say no to people. He didn't say no to people. Either he would give them what they asked for, or he would give them something better, or please them in another way if he's unable to fulfill their request. But outright, no, I can't do that. He didn't say things like that. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he responds this way back to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and then he said an additional type of compliment to Abu Hurairah. He said, I didn't think anyone before you would ask me this. لما أعرفك لحرصك على الحديث. I didn't think anyone would ask you before this because I know how interested and covetous you are of the hadith. So he calls it hadith. So actually there are certain words that are terms that later on developed, but very clearly we see here that when we say hadith, actually it's something the Prophet ﷺ, he himself said, what I say is a hadith. Right? And hadith literally means like event, occurrence, or something you said. But when we say al-hadith, with a definitive article, then we're generally referring to the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you might ask, well, why Abu Hurairah? Why did he say that to him? Weren't there other Sahaba who also, didn't all the Sahaba want to listen to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and were covetous with hadith? Why particularly Abu Hurairah? Why him? And the thing about Abu Hurairah is that he was a young man when he came into Islam. He was not there in Mecca, and he only spent about 3 or 4 years toward the end of the Prophet ﷺ's life with him. But one of the things that is distinctive about him, and he mentioned this about himself in some of the narrations, he said that many of the Sahaba were busy in the market and trying to earn a living and so forth, but I decided to leave all of that and I wanted to spend all of my time with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So in terms of the men around the Prophet ﷺ, the one who had probably the most access, especially in the latter part of his life ﷺ, would have been Abu Hurairah. Anas ibn Malik also is one of those people because he served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years. And this is the secret behind why are these two particular men the ones who have the greatest number of hadith attributed to them, narrated by them, because of their access. Right? You don't see a lot of hadith by Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. You don't have a lot of them. Or even Umar, or Uthman, rarely, or Ali. Abdullah ibn Umar, yes, because he also was a young man who had time to spend a lot of time with the Prophet ﷺ. So Abu Hurairah in particular, he was from Ahl al-Suffah. And Ahl al-Suffah, the people of the bench, if you've ever been to the mosque of the Prophet ﷺ in Medina, there's a raised area right behind the maqam, right behind his tomb, ﷺ. That's there to indicate that that's where they lived. So they literally lived right in the, adjacent room. I can't even say house because they're really rooms. Adjacent room to the rooms of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So Ahl al-Suffah were there 24/7. They were there only to be close to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to worship and to learn from him. And so, they left everything else for that, just to do that. And Abu Hurairah was probably the most prominent one of all of those people who were there. So he said, I decided that I only wanted to do this. Had he not decided to do that, and had he decided to spend all the time or some of the time trying to make a living and so forth, then much of the sunnah that we know, we would not have access to it, because he was key in that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sakharahu, he's the one who made him available to be able to do that amongst some of the other Sahaba.
In fact, this is exactly one of the objections of the Shia friends too. They say he spent only 3-4 years with Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you have like thousands of ahadith from Abu Hurairah. So that's the answer.
Yeah, no, we don't deny that's the case, but that's an old objection. Even Orientalists said similar things. Some of them even went to the extent of saying, was he actually a real person? Did they make him up? Because we don't actually really know his first name. But that doesn't mean that we don't know who he was, right? Was his first name Abdullah? Was it something else? Different narrations. But clearly he is referred to here as Abu Hurairah, and other Sahaba mentioned him Abu Hurairah, and the people who transmitted from him, from amongst the Tabi'een, are so great a number to the extent that you can't say they all made it up, made up this person. Impossible. These are just, they try to plant seed doubt with people, and I don't know.
So we don't know his first name.
He married after the death of the Prophet. Yeah, I didn't read the Bible before I came here, so I'd have to look that up. I'm sorry, you asked a question? So he asked about this, man a'adham min ash-shafa'a yawm al-qiyamah, and then the Prophet ﷺ answered back, whoever says La ilaha illallah khalisan min qalbi, so with sincerity from his heart, aw min nafsihi, or his soul. Again, this what we'd call also a shak min al-rawi. He wasn't sure, did he say heart or did he say soul? And they have similar meanings, so he said one of them. So here it says man qala, right, whoever says. But they say that speech is actually a banner, an indicator of what's in the heart. And that means that true speech will always indicate what's inside, which indicates that it's not really what you said, but it's the only way we can know what you actually have going on inside. So when the other hadith that say, Man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah, whoever says la ilaha illallah goes to paradise, does that mean that someone who doesn't believe in la ilaha illallah just says it, we read this, he's going to go to paradise? If he denied his whole life, how can we? No. So even qala, saying, means that it's indicator, a banner of what's in the heart. Right? وَإِنَّمَا الْكَلَامُ فِي الْفُؤَادِ. But kalam, the real speech, is in the fu'ad, it's in the heart. That's just a manifestation of what's already there. And then the last part of the hadith confirms this. خالصا, right? Well, khalis means that which is pure. So when we say al-asal al-khalis, you say pure honey means one that doesn't have any impurities in it, shawa'ib, or has been purified. So the khalis is the one that is impure, in other words, from any other reason, any other intention, any other reason why they would say La ilaha illallah. So it means living La ilaha illallah, coming from the heart or from the soul, same thing. That means that not just saying it, but it becomes part and parcel of who you are. Then this specific shafa'ah will be for those people who will enter paradise without any discomfort. The happiest of those that the Prophet ﷺ reserves this specific shafa'ah for are those who will enter min ghayri itab wala hisab wala adhab, without any type of accounting or punishment or rebuke from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They will enter paradise based upon that specific shafa'ah for these. Who are these people? These are awliya, yani these are the saints and the people in very high maqam with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the shafa'ah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is just kind of confirms that of who these people actually are. And that's what Abu Hurairah was looking for. So actually it also gives you an idea that when you ask for something, when you reach for something, especially things of the next life or things about the betterment of your soul, always reach for the best. Right? When we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for paradise, we don't say, I'll take one of the lower tiers, just that's fine, I don't mind, I'll take, No, we ask Jannat al-Firdaus, we ask the highest paradise, right? We're not, أنتم لا تدعوا بخيلة. You're not asking a stingy one, you know, like, well, let me check my thing here. I think all of the upper tiers are kind of taken up. Prophets, you know, angels are going to be there too, so not much room. Maybe we can fit you in. And so you say, can I just give me the little spot? No, you ask for the best. You reach for the best. If you don't reach the best, that's something else. But what you try to do is for the best. Abu Hurairah asked about the best thing. Man as'ad al-nas. Who is the one who is the happiest? Why? Because he wants that. That's what he's looking for. He's thinking about Amr al-Akhirah. He's totally unconcerned with the dunya. Totally unconcerned. To the extent he's satisfied sleeping out in the open on the bench in the mosque, and barely a room to cover him. He doesn't care. As long as he is close to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he can learn from him, he can embody all of the meanings that will sprout forth from him ﷺ, even for a few years, and he wants to stay with him for that. And who are these? These are the best people who walked on the face of the earth. Who cares about dunya?
You thought my question was, so we don't know Abu Huraira's real name?
I didn't say that. I said there's different opinions about what his name might be. Not that we don't know, but we can't pinpoint and say for certain it's this.
So what are those?
Well, one says Abdullah, I think another one was, I can't recall right now, but different opinions. Well, I shouldn't say real name. In other words, Abu Hurairah was a nickname he was given because he used to like to carry kittens and cats in his sleeve. Or he was always seen with kittens and cats and things like that. And one says in his sleeve, actually. So he was addressed like this. And what's a name except to identify who the person is? Now, what we differ about, what was his given birth name from his parents? That we can't say with certainty. That's all. There are stronger opinions, weaker opinions. I don't recall exactly which is which, but I do recall that there's no like definitive one answer for that. So, طيب. The next hadith, I think we'll finish with this one. Also, kind of is the capstone in understanding the idea of knowledge. Here it's talking about being taken away.
Before we move to the next hadith, can you please give me some pointers on the question I asked? Like, if someone
Can we save that till the end? The end after everything. Inshallah. عن عبد الله بن عمرو ابن العاص قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن الله لا يقبض العلم انتزاعا ينتزعه من العباد ولكن يقبض العلم بقبض العلماء حتى إذا لم يبقي عالما. In another رواية حتى إذا لم يبقى عالم اتخذ الناس رؤوسا جهالا فسئلوا فأفتوا بغير علم فضلوا وأضلوا. So Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As said, I heard the Messenger of Allah say, Allah does not remove knowledge all at once or by plucking it from his slaves. Well, it doesn't say here in the riwayah from his servants, or by plucking it, period. Rather, he takes back knowledge by taking the scholars until he leaves, or until no scholar is left remaining. The people will then take ignorant ones as their leaders. They will be asked and will answer without knowledge, and hence they are astray and will lead others astray. This hadith is very pivotal actually, because it gives you an idea of kind of the Islamic worldview outlook on I think I mentioned, talked about yesterday in Princeton, for those of you who were there, about how we look at history and civilization and how are things progressing, so to speak. So there's a modern notion that we inherited from the Enlightenment that with technological progress and things of convenience ever increasing, people can do or have a machine do something that people used to take years to do or days or something, and now can be done. In your little iPhone you have a computer there that's more powerful than a computer that would take up a whole room as big as this in the 50s. So obviously things are progressing in a sense on that level. And so the Enlightenment thinkers also theorize that people will progress too, both morally, ethically, so they'll have a greater understanding of the world and the way it works, and thus they'll have a greater understanding of who they are, and then we'll come to a point where there'll be no more strife and fighting and wars and all that, and everyone will live happily ever after. So obviously that didn't happen. It's not happening. In many ways, morally and ethically, people are much worse now, if we were to do like a comparison, than before. And to me, this hadith kind of points out why. So Allah doesn't take away knowledge. So what type of knowledge is He talking about here? Right? Because if we're talking about quantifiable knowledge, you know, if we're talking about volumes of books in libraries, right? How many books does you know, the Library of Congress hold? How many volumes? Millions, right? At least millions and millions. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were no libraries. In fact, the Quran wasn't written in one volume. It was written on pieces of animal skin or palm tree bark. It wasn't even in one single volume. So in terms of quantifiable, well, if we want to call it that, there wasn't much there. So that can't be what this hadith is talking about. It must be talking about something else. So it's talking about ilm that is the type that penetrates people and informs what they believe, what they see, who they are, how they act. That's why knowledge is also referred to as light. Al-ilmu nur, wa nur Allahi la yuhda li'asi. Right? Imam al-Shafi'i, when he asked his teacher, famous 2 lines of poetry, سألت وطيعا عن سوء حفظي فأرشدني إلى ترك المعاصي وأعلمني أن العلم نور ونور الله لا يهدى لعاصي. I complained to Waqiyah about my bad memorization, and Imam al-Shafi'i's bad memorization is that if he had the pages of a book open like this, he'd have to put his hand on one side so he wouldn't memorize both of them at the same time. That's his bad su' al-hifz, not very good memorization. So I don't know what we are exactly. If right. So Waqiyah, which was his teacher, arshadani ila tark al-ma'asi. He said, leave sins, don't sin. Imam al-Shafi'i, al-Muhim, that's what he told him. وَأَعْلَمْنِي أَنَ الْعِلْمُ نُورٌ, and he taught me that knowledge is light. And this light that is knowledge does not enter the heart of the sinner. So we're talking about a type of knowledge, a knowledge of God. You know, al-ilm al-rabbani, knowledge of the divine. This is what is becoming less and less and less. So he said, he takes back knowledge, right? He doesn't remove it, takes back. So yaqbid, la yantazi'. So yaqbid means to grab something that was originally yours and take and repossess it. That means that this knowledge, its source is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He is the one who gave. The hadith we read before, right? إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ, and Allahu huwa al-mu'ti wa ana al-qasim. Allah is the mu'ti, He is the one who gives, and the Prophet ﷺ is the qasim. That ata, that giving, is distributed by way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. But where does it come from? That light, that nur, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يُخْرِجُهُم مِّنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ. He takes them out from dhulumat, right? So from darknesses, not just one darkness, because anything that is not light can be multiple variant darknesses, and brings them to the light. Here it's a parable from misguidance or dalal to hidayah, to guidance. So this knowledge is something that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it can come one of 2 ways. Either like the hadith we read before, إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ, knowledge is by learning. So Allah chooses amongst His servants those who will be instruments for people to learn from Allah's knowledge, right? That's why it's important for, even in our paradigm, for the teacher or teachers to be ones who embody what they teach. In other words, what they say and what they teach should not be different from who they are. If it is, then they're not really knowledgeable. You won't really benefit from them. But they have to be ones who embody what they're saying. إِنَّمَا الْعِلْمُ بِالتَّعَلُّمِ. That's one way. The other way is Allah can give inspiration, give knowledge, give light to people, even without the intermediary of a teacher. This is also possible. People who are very pious, who are very sincere, and are longing for that, then Allah will not disappoint them. So here when he says taking back al-ulama, the scholars, he means those who embody the nur, the light. And so it was at its brightest with the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And ever since his death ﷺ, it has been in a constant dim. It's dimming. Quite opposite the notion of progress, right? It's actually getting less and less and less and less. So it's not talking about quantifiable knowledge, right? It's talking about knowledge which is light, knowledge which is practice of that which one knows and informs one's behavior. And I think this, it's not a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, but it goes back to Sayyidina Uthman. He told the Sahaba or the Tabi'een that you live in a time كثير فقهاؤه قليل قراؤه. You live in a time now where the fuqaha, those who have true understanding, are many. وَالْقُرَّاء, the ones who are, you translate literally, it means the readers or the reciters, but what it means is the ones who are busy preserving the recitation. So the ones who preserve the Quran, the memorizers of the Quran, who preserve the text for us, there will be few. Not that there's not enough of them, but in proportion, the fuqaha are also the qurra at the same time. But there will be many of those. This was the time of the Sahaba. Many peoples of light. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, أَصْحَابِ كَالنُّجُومِ بِأَيِّهِمْ اقْتَدَيْتُمْ اهْتَدَيْتُمْ. Whichever ones you follow, you will be guided. So many of them, right? Then he said, there will come a time, يَأْتِي عَلَيْكُمْ زَمَانٍ كَثِيرٌ قُرَّاءُهُ قَلِيلٌ فُقَهَاؤُهُ. There will become a time when the fuqaha, the ones who have true enlightened understanding, will be very few. كَثِيرٌ قُرَّاءُهُ. But the ones who will be busy, who can preserve the text, will be many. We probably have more huffaz now of Quran than we ever did, right? Small children, 7, 8, 9 years of old, in the madaris in Pakistan and in the Arab world and in Indonesia and in Malaysia and in Africa, they memorize the Quran, and they do it, relatively easily. In fact, that's one of the, I would say, one of the signs of the miraculous nature of the Quran, that it can be memorized relatively easily. Not many people memorize the Bible word for word, or the Torah or the Psalms of David, but people memorize the Quran literally without a single mistake, cover to cover. But how many are the people who are fuqaha? How many are the people who can understand and approach the words of the Quran and inform us of what it's actually saying, what it means, and how do I apply it in my life? How many are those? And the end of that is that تحفظ فيه حروفه. So the letters of the Quran are preserved. There have been attempts for people where their mistakes were tried to be made in the Quran, like to introduce mistakes in the text so that Muslims might go astray, and they've all failed. Even when the Quran was printed the first time, there was, back when the printing press, the first Qur'an's masahif were printed, like printing, not written by hand, somewhere I think in the 1800s. And initially many of the ulama didn't want it to be printed because they saw it as like a new innovation, and ever since the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, it was always written by hand and always personally checked. In other words, so when you have a mushaf it was authenticated, right? Every letter was authenticated. Now printing, you're kind of taking that outside of the hands of the scholars and you're giving it to a machine. So they were apprehensive about this. On top of that, طبع, there was a belief at the time that printing press used a ribbon made from swine. So they did not want the letters of the Quran to be printed out something that had touched swine. So even though the Gutenberg printing press was what, 1600s I think? Something like that. Where are the history people here? Yeah, Gutenberg, printing press, yeah, 1600s. 1600s. The actual first books weren't really printed in the Muslim world, the first one being the Mus'haf, until well into the 1800s, mid to late 1800s. So Europe had printed books way before the rest of the Muslim world did. And that's one of the reasons for it. So even when this printing press started to happen, the ulama always formed committees by which they would authenticate even what the printed book, the printed Mus'haf would print. If you open any Mus'haf today and go to the back pages, you will find a page that has a committee of people who authenticate it. If it doesn't have that, you can't really say, wow, this is Quran. Because our authentication is not the printed thing that comes from our printing press, but rather the scholars who reviewed at least the original copy. Now it's all software, but whatever it was, and then it was printed after that. So, and Allah has promised us this, right? إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الذِّكْرَ إِنَّا لَهُ لَحَافِظُونَ. We have sent down the remembrance and we will preserve it. So He chooses Azza wa Jal to preserve it in a way, in a manner that by people, by memorizing, by it being in the hearts of men and women who have memorized it. But that will continue till the end of time. Whereas here in this particular saying of Uthman, I believe, وَتَضِيعُ حُدُودُهُ. But the meanings, the hudud, the boundaries of what the Quran is actually trying to tell us are lost, will be lost. There will become a time when these understandings will be lost. Because the preservation of understanding can't be captured merely by words and lines in a book. It needs living, breathing exemplars, living, breathing people who preserve that enlightened understanding of how it should be approached. We all read the same Quran today, right? We don't have any difference about it. Even other groups like the Shia and the Abadiyya, and kind of no one's disagreed that this is the Mus'haf. We're agreed on it. And the Sunni world, at least, they all read the same hadith. Don't have much disagreement about that either. But yet, we have people, we're reading the same thing, and people are coming with completely different understandings out of it. Almost, not just almost, they are opposite. They're contradictory. They can't coexist. How can you read the Quran and the Hadith and then understand from that mass suicide, mass bombings, killing people, setting a bomb in a mosque on Jum'ah could be legal? Could be anything that the Quran and Sunnah would be exhorting you to do. How is that possible? It's not. Unless the understanding of behind these nusus remains there. If it's not there, people now are reading these sacred texts with their hawa, with their caprice, with their whim, their desire. The end result they already have in mind. They know what they want to do. But it's not based upon what they read in the Quran and Sunnah, it's based upon a disease in the heart. So if they want to enact revenge on someone, vengeance, and this is a goal, they will look and find, and they will see the text in the light that they want to see it. And so they will read it with a reading that's devoid of mercy. They'll read every ayah of the Quran and they won't see the mercy in it. They'll only see what they see in themselves. Because when you read Quran, it's going to be a reflection of who you are. What you get out of it is a reflection of what's in here. So if there's disease in here, that's all they're going to see. And Mutanabbi has a very famous line of poetry. He said, the meaning of which, and whoever is of a sickness will find even pure water to be bitter. And if you're sick, it's true, right? If you have a fever or a cold or something and They can put, the most delicious meal in front of you, but it'll taste terrible because you're not in a state by which to appreciate that. So what about people who are diseased in their hearts? If they're not in a state to read the text, then they'll read it any which way that comes to, to their machinations, and it won't be reflective of what's really there. That's why the Quran can only penetrate the pure hearts. It won't penetrate a defective heart, one that is spiritually diseased. And this also shows that if the practice of religion is not done in a way that is enlightened, then religion itself can be disastrous. That may sound like a little controversial, but I truly believe that. If it's not practiced in the way that it was meant to be and understood in the way that it was meant to be, then it can be disastrous. Completely disastrous. And I personally believe that most of the rejection of organized religion today is based upon that. Not upon the texts themselves, but on the excesses and the misinformation promoted by people who claim to be of religion, and nevertheless they lead people astray. Like the end of the hadith, فَضَلُّوا وَأَضَلُّوا. They are astray, and so what happens? What's the result? They lead others astray.
That's what is happening to us.
Yep. So I think our time is up. I'm not quite finished with this hadith, so we'll continue it next week, inshallah. But in reference to Sister Salma's question about the hadith, that's kind of a very long conversation about how all that happened, but it kind of ties into what's here, namely that the preservation of the hadith is true. In the first 150 years after the hijrah, there was no kind of formal program to write down the hadith or to compile it in a way. It didn't happen until the time of Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, often referred to as the fifth righteous Khalifa, that he instituted or he initiated that program. But the hadith was preserved, right, fi sudur, in the hearts of the people who had memorized it, much in the same way the Quran was. Keep in mind, the Quran wasn't formalized into one volume during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ either, right? We don't dispute that. And it was done first during the time of Abu Bakr. And then that recension of Abu Bakr was later adopted by Uthman, and it became sort of the standard. But despite that written progression, there was always an oral one. There was always an oral one. So the hadith were always preserved orally, and we don't rely on the written part. The written narration is kind of just an affirmation of what already has been transmitted orally. Imam al-Bukhari and Muslim, or even Imam Malik, they didn't have big written compilations to rely upon. They had their hadith memorized. Imam al-Bukhari was Amir al-Mu'min fil hadith, means he had like 1 million hadith memorized. People think like, that's not possible. How's that? We said knowledge is light. And so if Allah chooses the light to penetrate one, then it is possible. And no one actually disputes that. No one disputes that Bukhari or Muslim kind of, no one says that they made up the hadith. But it's true that it was not formally compiled until that later date. But we have the consensus of all of those people who ever lived, that this is authoritative, that yes, some of the hadith may seemingly contradict one another, but there's a methodology to deal with that, right? Because each hadith is capturing a particular instance of the Prophet Muhammad's life. That being the case, sometimes rulings were superseded, sometimes he did both, sometimes this is a general principle and this is specific to a specific group. So these methodologies are all there for dealing with what seem to be like contradictions, but in reality they are not. And remember, it is dependent upon human memory and human precision in communicating that memory. So like here we see here, الشك من الراوي, he wasn't sure, did he say murtab or muqin? In these hadith it doesn't really make a big difference because the meanings are so similar. But sometimes in terms of rulings it will make a difference. And so that's why we have this sort of vastness in the legal schools, the four main legal schools of Abu Hanifa, Imam al-Azam, Imam Malik, Imam al-Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal. There are many others, but these 4 are the ones that are kind of muharrar. They're the ones who are well preserved and well known and have been kind of went over backwards and forwards, and so we rely on them in terms of legal rulings. But part of the reason why there's difference between them is that some of them had different methodologies into how they would reconcile between seemingly contradictory hadith or hadith and something else, like hadith and Quran, or hadith and general Sharia principles, or hadith and, like for Imam Malik, Amal Ahl al-Medina, the way and custom of the people, of the scholars of al-Medina. So that's a long, very long discussion that's discussed in Usul al-Fiqh, but we should feel confident and not have any trouble with the idea that the hadith is necessary, and it's one of our sacred sources.
The other point they raised was, like when I said it was orally transmitted, and they said that while orally transmitting, it can be faulty. Oral transmission can be faulty, and they kind of mentioned an experiment that in a group, when you tell a story to one group and then the last group, the story.
Can I give you some advice? Yeah. Don't waste your time with them. It's not worth it. Yes?
I've seen a lot of circles where most people only want to rely on Bukhari or Muslim. What is the feeling around all the other hadiths and sunnah that we see? I'm trying to understand the big picture of why everybody seems to spend only on Bukhari or Muslim. A lot of people discount some of the other hadith. And the second question is, because I've actually read them on my own, but obviously they're very difficult. So what would be a good approach to trying to just go a little deeper? Or supplemental books to help, doing this, when you're teaching? Is this a good approach to continue to just try to learn more?
The first question, no, it's not only Bukhari and Muslim. What's referred to as Al-Kutub al-Sitta, the 6 books, are considered the 6 books that are Sahih, which include Bukhari, Muslim, At-Tirmidhi, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, and Nasa'i. Those 6 are considered to be not equally sound. Bukhari is given the highest, the highest reputation, and then Muslim. But the other ones are considered also to have Sahih Hadith. In addition to those, there's 3 other books like the Muwatta of Imam Malik and the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal and Mustadrak ibn al-Hakim, which also are considered to contain many, if not all of their hadith are rigorously authenticated. And even the ones that are a little less, which are called Hadith Hasan, also are considered to be authoritative, even in legal rulings. So it's not the case where it's just Bukhari and Muslim. I think there's been kind of a recent movement, past century or so, kind of to emphasize that be careful of bad hadith, and if you follow the wrong hadith and so forth. And hadith, in terms of their applicability and how to reconcile between them, that's really a job for scholars. It's not for regular laymen. It's not for normal people. So even when I'm reading for you here, I'm taking from what the ulama have said. I'm not trying to do anything on my own, because it's not a science for me to do that. That takes someone who is kind of, a proper scholar who can read the hadith and then understand its meaning based upon their knowledge of language and of the Quran and all that type of thing. So for most people, there are hadith collections that were kind of compiled in a way for people like us to read them, like Arba'in al-Nawawi, Riyadh al-Salihin, things like this. I would not advise, even this book is kind of towards that direction too, because it's only a subset. It's only 300 hadith out of over 2,500 without repeats in Bukhari. So it's not meant to be like the ones that we read. These concise ones are kind of just to give you an idea, and they're hadith that are more often than less. They are they consist of sort of their own chapter. Like each hadith you can have a whole series of lectures about it, because they are kind of emblematic of the Sunnah and of the Prophet Muhammad.